Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. We are continuing with our lessons on Introduction to Islamic Jurisprudence or Introduction to the Fiqh. And we're going over the brief overview of the different chapters as classified by Muhakkik. And we're in the last section. I said there's four sections of fiqh over here. There's ibadat, uqud, and iqa'at, and then there's ahkam. And ahkam is pretty much all those things which wouldn't fit in one of those other sections. So we talked about the sections of hunting and slaughtering the animal, food and drink. Now the next book, Kitabul Ghasb. Ghasb is uh, usurpation. Usurpation. So misappropriation, gasp, means the taking or using of the property of another person by force, or property of another by force. That's without the other's permission. So you've taken something and you're using it without the other's permission. Firstly, he says that this is forbidden. This is haram. Secondly, it renders the ghasib, the one misappropriator, the usurper, as liable. So that if the property is damaged or destroyed, if the property is damaged or destroyed while in the control of this misappropriator, this usurper, he is then liable for for that for that property, whether the loss or damage was his fault or not, because he misappropriated it. So, like if someone stole a car, they usurped a car, and then that car it got a flat tire. Who's responsible for the flat tire? The usurper. That car he took and it was damaged by, he just parked it and it was damaged by a flood. Who's responsible for it? The usurper is responsible for it. Or if he goes and damages it, he drives it and crashes it into things, off-roads it or whatever, then he is still responsible for it. So whether the use whatever the use one makes of this misappropriated usurped property is forbidden. It's forbidden. Wudu taken with usurped water and prayer in usurped clothing or in a misappropriated place is void, he says, is void. Now, there's a special section of fiqh you want to look at and see if there's any subtle details, differences amongst the Maraja right as in the beginning of Kitab al-Salah, where you talk about the conditions for Salah. Here you have about the place of prayer, and even in wudu you have this about wudu that's usurped. At this point, it must be known that in the same way his misappropriation or usurpation results in liability, so destruction causes liability. Meaning, for example, that if a person smashes someone else's window, he is liable for it. Causing likewise produces liability. Causing here means that if someone does not do any direct damage, like smashing a window, but does something that causes the damage, then he is liable. Like if a man, for example, leaves a thing like the skin of some fruit, like a banana, skin of some fruit on the sidewalk, and a person slips on it, and as a consequence suffers damage. That man is responsible, Shahid Mutahari is saying, for the damage suffered by the person who slipped. Okay? Okay, the next one is the book of preference, Shafi. Shafi, Shafai, it means the right of precedence of one partner to buy the share of the other. So when there's two partners, at least, then the proceedings of the other partner to buy the share of the other if he wants to sell out. If two people are legitimate partners according to Sharia rulings and one of them wants to sell his share, the other partner, if he wants to buy the share for the same terms and price for which others wish to purchase it, has the right of precedence. The next book is the book of Ihya al-Maut. Um, Ihya, Ihya al-Maut. It's English transinterpretations, as you see. It'd be better if we had the English, Arabic here. This is the book of enlivening the dead lands, enlivening dead lands, not enlivening the dead, enlivening the dead lands. So this book concerns wastelands. You have wastelands, lands that are dead or barren lands, that by the absence of buildings or farming and such is lifeless. The holy he says there's a attributed hadith, like I said, with all these hadith, you have to check them because I haven't checked them. That says whoever enlivens a dead land owns it. It's a popular one you hear from the ulama. And this issue has many facets, and these in fiqh are discussed at length in this book. Okay. Now we have the book of finding things, lost things. In this book, in this kitab, uh, the laws or rulings related to finding lost things, finding things the owner of which are not known. We don't have that saying like they have in the West, finders, keepers, losers, weepers, right? There's actually laws and fiqh and responsibilities when you find a lost item. So the find is so the thing that is found, firstly, you cannot know the owner. If you know the owner, then you can return it right away. But you don't know the owner. Now, the found thing is either an animal or even a human or other than an animal or other than a human. If it is an animal, so yes, they talk about if you find a lost person, uh, but if let's talk about the animal here. If the animal might be harmed if it's left alone, like you go out and there's a stray cattle, and if that animal might be harmed if left alone, however, like a sheep in the middle of the desert, the finder can take it into his control, but he must search for its owner. If the owner is found, the animal must be returned to him. And if the owner is not found, with the permission of Hakim Shari, the animal must be given to the poor. So here you want to check your marja taqlid on the issues of what to do with lost items, if it's an animal or non-animal. Do you have to donate it into charity, or its amount into charity, or are you allowed to use it? So these are things you have to ask your marja taqlid. So if the found thing is not an animal and its value is less than 2.32 grams of minted silver. So you go and you look at the grams of minted silver. Again, check this one with your Maraja. And you see its value in your world today, your market value of that much minted silver. Then here, that would be the value that you judge it on, its market value. The finder can keep it for himself, he says. Again, check your marja taqlid. But if it is more, he must search for the owner for 1 year. So if it is more, he must search for the owner for 1 year. Let's see what today's current value of 2 grams of silver is in today's world. So 2 grams of silver is around $3.24 USD, around $4.52 Canadian. That's just for 2 grams of silver. As you see, it's 2.32 grams. So let's see if we can get a number for that. 32. So 2.32 grams, about $5.33 Canadian, or $3.71 USD. Okay. So it's not much, right? It's not much. And you gotta check your marja taqlid on this one. But if it is more, he must search for the owner for 1 year. Unless like a fruit, like if he finds fruit, like he finds a watermelon, it cannot be kept for a year. Um, if the owner is not found, and if the found thing was not made in the sacred area of they didn't find it in the sacred area of Mecca, the finder has the option of doing three things. And here do you want to check with your marja taqlid. Either he can use it for himself with the intention of that if the owner is discovered, he will repay the found thing itself or its value to the owner. Or he gives it as charity, as sadaqah, with the same intention. So he's given it as sadaqah, and if the owner is found, he'll pay it back its value to him. Or he can keep it in the hope that the owner will be found. Okay? So these are rules you want to become familiar with your marja taqlid, especially in our time and age. You find things. Okay. If the find has no special signs, the search for the owner is not necessary. And the finder has the same three options from the time of the find. Okay, so you want to see, like I said, if they have these options. The next book is the book of inheritance. The book of inheritance. We know that in Islam there are laws of inheritance. Inheritance in Islam is not a matter of choice, by the way. In Islam, a person has no right to specify a certain sum for a certain hair. So it's not like you can't say, okay, I'm mad at him, so I'm not giving him a share. There are specific shares and they must be given. Or for an example, one cannot say, I leave it all my wealth to only one of my heirs. Like he cannot leave it all to the spouse. It's common and maybe in the Western world that the spouse gets all the inheritance. That is not how it works. When the husband dies or the wife dies, her or his estate must be divided amongst the heirs, meaning the husband or wife would get a share and the children would get respected shares. So according to certain levels and ranks, which he brings up here. So after a person's death, his wealth, apart from his 1/3, we mentioned that 1/3, which he can stipulate to do whatever he wants with it. The rest of it is divided and shared amongst his heirs in accordance with the rulings. The heirs in the view of Islam are from different ranks. And by existence of one of the members of the first rank, the inheritance does not ever go to the second rank. Okay? So as long as there's someone in the first rank, it doesn't go to the second rank. And if there's no one in the first rank, then it goes to the second rank. And if there's at least one person in the second rank, then it's not going to go to the third rank. But if there's no one in the third rank, it'll go to the third rank. Okay? So the third rank only inherits if there is no one from the first and second to inherit. So what are these ranks briefly? The first level consists of the deceased parents and sons and daughters, and if the sons and daughters have died, the grandchildren. Okay? So the parents, the sons, daughters, and if there's no sons and daughters, the grandchildren. The second if is rank is the deceased four grandparents, brothers and sisters. And if the brothers and sisters have themselves passed away, their children. The third rank is the deceased uncles. So the uncles of the deceased and the aunts of the deceased or their children. Okay? Until here, of course, he says we have spoken only about the inheritance of your family members. There is other inheritance as well, the inheritance of the husband and the wife, and they inherit their share one from the other before the inheritance of any of these three ranks. So if there's a husband or wife, no matter about these ranks, they will always inherit before going to these ranks. About what is the share of each of the members of the ranks and the husband and the wife. However, it is quite detailed to go into here. Another thing is that some things disqualify you from getting inheritance, such as apostasy. An apostate does not inherit from a Muslim. You can inherit from a non-Muslim, but you cannot. But apostate cannot inherit from a Muslim. So anyone who's, God forbid, children have left Islam, they do not inherit from you. Other things that cause lack of inheritance is illegitimacy. Illegitimacy of birth, someone born outside of conceived outside of a marriage contract, then that person is not entitled to one of the shares. Okay, you can check your marja taqlid on all these things. Another thing is if the person is one of the heirs and he kills the person, he's a murderer, um, then he doesn't get the inheritance as well. So these are some things that are discussed about over here. What disqualifies you from inheritance and the types and levels of inheritance. Okay, now the next book here is the book of Qada. Qadi, the judge, Qada, the judgment. They translate it as arbitration. So this means the settling in court of differences and disputes. And there are so many that we cannot even summarize them, he says. Briefly, we can say that the system of judgment or arbitration in Islam is a special system. The justice of the Qadi, the judge, is subject to extraordinary attention in Islam. So much precision has been given to the knowledgeable personality of the judge that he has to be a mujtahid. So this is about Hakam Shari, right? So he's a qualified jurist, at least for himself, and an expert of Islamic rights. And of course, here you can see you check your margins. Some may say he could be a partial mujtahid, right? That they may all say this, but I know at least I've seen it somewhere. So we'd have to have an overview of all the different marajas. But you have two different. You're about to have taqlid lessons, inshallah. You have two different types of jurist. You have a partial jurist and a complete jurist. Partial jurist is what you become through research. Slowly, you start to master different topics and different chapters. So if a person masters all the things needed to be a judge, then this is where he could be a judge in this area according to at least one of the scholars I've seen. I haven't seen anybody say no, but just putting it because I haven't had a full research of all the different rulings on it amongst the contemporary jurists. But anyways, about his moral and ethical competence as well. So endless diligence has been introduced. He must be free from all types of sin. So he's having he's having the quality of adala, right? He's a just person. He's adil. Um, Even those that do not directly affect his work, in no way does he have any right to accept payment from either of the two parties. So he cannot be bribed. He cannot be paid from the two parties that he's dealing with. That's a conflict of interest. Even after the arbitration, even after the ruling, he cannot be paid for it. His expenses are to be liberally reimbursed from Baitul Mal. Baitul Mal is the public treasury. So he's to be paid by the government from the public treasury. The position of the judge is to be so respected that the parties of the case to be arbitrated, whoever they may be, even if it's a ruler, even if it's a caliph, then they must be still respecting this judge, right? They must both present themselves. So even no matter who it is, both parties must present themselves before the judge with perfect respect for his position and in no way expect or demand partiality. Confession, testimonial, and in some cases oaths play an important role in the Islamic court system. And of course, you could have a wakil over here, I think. So there's different things that could be talked about here. Okay. The next one is the book of testimonies, witnesses. This one's the controversial one sometimes, right? You may hear. Uh, but this is a upper level fiqh, and there could be battle coverage on these things and discussions, I'm sure. I haven't studied it myself yet, but inshallah one day. So this book is connected to the book of courtrooms or judgment in the same way that the book of confessions would be. If a person claims something, the other party admits it or denies it. If he admits it, this is sufficient for for the claim for the claimant to be proved and and for the arbitrator to reach his verdict, for the judge to reach his verdict. If he denies the claimant, is bound to produce a testimony. So if he denies it, then the claimant, the one making the claim, is must produce a witness, a testimony. And if he produces testimony and it meets the conditions stipulated in the Islamic legislative system, his claim is proved, and the denier is not bound to produce testimony. In certain circumstances, the denier, the one who's denying the claim, is bound to swear an oath. And if he swears an oath, his persecution is to go on no further. In fiqh, it is said, testimony upon the claimant and an oath upon whomever denies it. The issue of judgment are so many that books have been written solely on this subject that are as voluminous as some of the great books written on all the subjects of jurisprudence, he says. Okay, so now he has the books of hudud and tazirat, and these things concern like when you have a just Islamic legislative system, like you have the presence of the imam or his direct representatives, and but this is you have this is an area of academic research for us who don't have that. Yeah. So this is the book of hudud and tazirat. What's the difference between hudud and tazirat? Hudud means those legal penalties or punishments that are issued by a court system that are actually legislated in the Islamic legislative system, like they have a set punishment. Um, and tazirat is something that is lesser than that, and the judge decides to do it, to do what to do it. So this book is about punishments in the same way that the previous two books were about judgment. Some of the systems of punishments have been precisely defined and determined in Islam, and these are to be performed in the same way, regardless of the conditions or of any other factors. And these types are called hudud. Okay, these types are called hudud. So, however, that the Sharia considers to depend, there are other types which are some punishments which the Sharia considers to depend on the view of the Hakim. It's left the judge to make the decision on what to do by taking into consideration the causes and conditions of the crime and any motivating factors or factors that make up the crime more serious and enforces a punishment in accordance. These are called tazirat. Okay, and there's some different discussions there. You could read through all these all these things in this book, but um then you have the book of Qisas, retaliation. It's a tooth for a tooth kind of thing. And again, all this is done under a proper, just, adult judge, just system. You know, this is like when you have imam present, uh, kind of uh, kind of um, kind of thing. This is and there's lots of discussion, by the way, on different aspects, but um, this is something you go to a hakim shari to for. You don't just you know take it into your own hands. You go to a judge, a court system, a police, something to sort it out and send you to a judge for it. You make a complaint, things like this that that are done. So there's a law and order, right? Qisas is also a type of punishment, but for the offenses wherein one person criminally ends the life or harms the body of another person. In reality, qisas is the right Islam gives to the offended person, to the harmed person, or to his heirs if the offense leads to the offended's death. Such offenses are either murder or loss or impediment of a part of the body, or are either intentional or similarly they are or similar to intentional, shabih amad, or purely mistake. Khata is khata, a mistake happens. So you have different types. An intentional offense is that the offense was committed with the intention to commit it. Deliberate, premeditated crime someone has done, such as a person who intends to kill a person and he attacks him and murders him. This person is guilty of committing a crime and deserves retaliation according to the Islamic Fiqh. Whether or not the attack was made with a weapon, or it doesn't matter, or whether it was something else, such as a stone, if the serious intention of the murderer was to kill the other, and this in fact he does, this is enough to be ruled as intentional. If the offense is similar to intentional, though, similar to intentional, it's similar to intentional. Is that the intention is to do something to the person, but not to do the harm which the act actually caused. Like he wanted to beat him up. He didn't want to brain damage him or kill him, you know? And an example of this is that a person with the intention of hurting another person hits him with a club, which results in the victim's death. And this is why people should avoid violence, because oftentimes accidents happen. People should avoid physical altercations. Purely a mistake. There's purely a mistake, something which is purely a mistake. However, uh, however, is that there was no intention at all, such as if someone had killed somebody by accident, only by like example, he was driving his car quite normally in the street, and he hit somebody by accident, pure mistake. In the cases of intentional killing or similar to intentional killing, the heirs of the deceased have the right for qisas. So they could ask for retribution from the judge, or they can ask for a kind of dia, blood money for it. Meaning that under supervision of a just Islamic legislative system and at the discretion of the nearest of kin, the killer, the murderer, can either be executed or forced to pay compensation, recompense. But in the case of a merely mistake, the last one where it was completely a mistake, the murderer is not to be executed and is only obliged to pay the heirs a dia, a financial recompense. So you see, it gives the kind of options there to to uh, to forgive the person, for the person to get out of it. And I know this is a controversial issue, so we're bringing Islamic law, and you got to look at it from an academic perspective and see about Islamic law, regardless of our contemporary controversial political ideas that around the world. That's something, we want to see what Islam has to say about it from an academic point of view. Okay, I think this is the last one. Yep, this is the last book, the Kitab al-Diya. This is the recompense, the blood money, what you call. Diya is like kisas, is that it is a right of the offended person or the heirs of the offended person upon the offender, with the difference that kisas is a way of taking payment in a kind of diya is a financial penalty. The laws of diya are like the laws of Qisas, and they are very detailed. And like I said, if someone hits somebody and they cause redness, they cause a red mark, they owe them blood money. If they cause them a black and blue, they owe them blood money. See, Islam is very restrictive on these things, and it's serious. It's putting penalties in place for hurting people. Islam is very much towards peace and keeping people safe and secure. So you have to remember this. These laws put penalties on people for doing things. A lot of times in our society today, people don't realize the extent of the wrong they do, and these kinds of things. If they knew these kinds of things, maybe they would hold back a lot. You know. Okay. So under the books of Qisas and Dia, the jurisprudence have gone into details, into questions on the liability of the doctors or of teachers. Back in old days, they used to discipline the children more roughly. Um, Even some places in the world, they may still do so. About doctors, they say that if the doctor is not proficient and makes a mistake in his treatment of the patient that leads to the patient's death, he is liable for the blood money. And if he is proficient and he treats the patient without the patient's permission or the permission of the patient's nearest kin, and the treatment leads to the patient's death, he is again liable. If the doctor is proficient, however, and he treats the patient with the permission of of that patient or of the patient's nearest kin, he must first make the condition that the patient or the heirs that he will do his utmost, but that should his of efforts happen to lead to the patient's death, he is not responsible. In this case, supposing that the patient dies or suffers some physical loss, the doctor is not liable and not subject to qisas. If, however, he does not make this condition before beginning the treatment, some of the jurists say that he is liable. Now, here you want to look into these issues with the Margitech lead, your Margitech lead. Okay, likewise, so we don't need to go too much more into this. So that should sum up our lessons um, of our introduction to fiqh, and we have now talked about all the different books of fiqh, and you have to look at these books academically. Yes, some of these things they don't apply to our current situations in the world or our cultural or our political situations in the world or certain areas and there's lots of different things to consider, but we have to look at it academically and understand it from the aspect of what Islam is saying, what are the evidences for these things, and do a kind of Bafak Kharaj on some things, and try to understand about Islam's rulings from an academic aspect. Yes, the most important thing to us in the Western world is our acts of worship as regards to our fiqh, our trades and transactions, our ika'at, our food and drink, these types of things, our inheritance. So some of these rulings, they're not practically used. But some things may be very important, like if you got in a fight with somebody, you owe them you owe them money, and if you left them some kind of mark, you owe them money. And there's lots of things to consider. Like I said, Islam very much has an emphasis on non-violence and peace and not hurting innocent people and not just going randomly around and injuring people. Even even you see discussions about the doctor. So there's lots to consider over here and look at in the jurisprudence, but this now has introduced you to all the chapters. And now from here, we'll go through a contemporary study of the fiqh rulings based on contemporary fiqh. So a lot of these books you won't see mentioned in there. Some of these ones that are not necessarily that important to us. So we'll go through more contemporary fiqh, like we'll look through ibadat, hukud, iqa'at, food and drink, inheritance. But after inheritance, we stop there at inheritance. We do the lost found thing, lost and found items, and then that is your main fiqh that you really need to know. And then inshallah we'll go through a classical study of Shura al-Islam. from an academic point of view. We'll get familiar with all the different rulings because it's an old book. Scholars' opinions sometimes change and things nowadays, or there's different opinions. So it's nice to get the whole overview of all the different fiqh of how it was in Muhakkik time. And then after that, you could have a kind of intermediate level where you start more in-depth analyzing the evidences, which we do inshallah a little bit so far. Inshallah, we'll continue it. Like we'll have istidlali, or we have like taklif. We do on the fasting of Ashura, a bath of Kharij on that. We have a bath of Kharij like course about music and singing. And different things could be brought there from makasib and istidlali will bring inshallah. And then after that, you could go into more Batha Kharaj like levels and analyze these things for yourself, inshallah, after having a second and maybe even a third level of usul fiqh or second level of usul fiqh. Okay, so I will end these lessons here. This completes our course of Introduction to Jurisprudence. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.